Hello and welcome to the COMMnections webinar series, brought to you by the Master of Arts in Communication program and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion on disrupting the narrative, a critical look at disinformation and media. My name is Natalie Cross and I'm the event producer. Please note today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the COMMnections playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the presentation to our moderator, Dr. Patricia Hernandez, Assistant Program Director and Senior Lecturer for the Master of Arts in Communication program.
Thank you. And welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And I always love seeing familiar names as the participants that join us. So thank you all for joining us on this Monday afternoon or whatever time it is in your time zone. I'm thrilled to have Dr. Freeman join us today, and I know he's going to do a wonderful job introducing himself as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over, and thank you so much for your time, Dr. Freeman.
Okay, thank you. It's great to be here. Welcome, everyone. I don't know if anyone can see me at this point. Will they have to see me later?
They can see you now.
Oh, they can see me. Okay, cool. Great. So I'll just jump in. The title is Disrupting the Narrative, a critical look at disinformation in media. I have a PhD from Howard University, and I've taught a couple of different classes now over at Hopkins. So I'll give you a little bit about my background, and then I'll talk about my work. So I'm from Austin, Texas, and this is a little picture of me as a little kid, and yeah, I didn't put a lot on this slide to say about myself, but let's move here. Okay, so I grew up in Austin. I grew up in housing projects. Education was very important in my life. Obviously, Austin is in the shadow of University of Texas, which was very lucky for me. I went to undergrad at University of Texas, had a lot of teachers who worked really, really hard with me and helped me to get into school. The professors at the University of Texas really helped jumpstart my career. I had lots of internships. I was essentially a reporter for most of my life. Now I'm a researcher, but as a kid, as a in high school, and in college, I was a reporter, and mostly a business reporter. My first job was in Detroit at the Wall Street Journal. So I worked at the Wall Street Journal for about 5 years, covering the auto industry, and then I was hired at the Washington Post to also cover the auto industry, and I did that for about 6 years. Let's see. So at the Washington Post in 2007. The newsroom editors were looking around the newsroom, asking for volunteers to go to Iraq, reporting volunteers. So this is a big highlight for me in my career. I always had a lot of curiosity about Iraq and the poor quality of media coverage that I was reading, as I was, in the newsroom. I was in the newsroom the day that the towers were brought down in Detroit. We had a huge, our headquarters was in one of the smaller buildings, like right behind that sailboat, maybe one of those buildings. But we had an office there, and it was very, difficult period for the newsroom. So one of the things that they did is they split up we had a huge directory of all the offices in the towers, and the reporters like myself and all the different bureaus. We had to go through the different names in the directory and call around and report on what happened with people. So after 9/11, I'm reading all this coverage. I'm in a lot of disbelief about what's being said about WMD and aluminum tubes and yellow cake, and none of it was really making sense to me. So 2007 comes around. It's a very dangerous period in Iraq, actually. And I volunteered to go, eventually get there, and it was a very eye-opening experience. For me, not so much for what I learned about Iraqi society, but I learned a lot about my own country, seeing mostly Black and brown people on the front lines, and our poor white brothers and sisters were out there too. I mean, a lot of people from Texas, from little towns and things that I never even heard of. So that has always really stuck with me. So I leave journalism, I leave my career in about 2011, and I go to graduate school at Howard University. One of the things that's very difficult about Iraq is I didn't really have a lot of good knowledge about, how the world works. And I was a very high level reporter, but a lot of what I was saying didn't make a lot of sense to me. So eventually, I'm at Howard. I'm looking around for a dissertation topic, and I started to see a lot of the parallels with this Russian election interference coverage that I saw with Iraq. And I immediately start collecting lots of different, I guess we would call them media artifacts or articles, and other social media posts, etc. And so my topic sort of emerges into this discourse about Russiagate. I was very lucky because there were a black angle sort of emerged in Russiagate around two primary claims that I've worked with. One that Black America was the primary target of Russian disinformation in 2016, and that this disinformation was successful and it's effectively demobilized Black voters in 2016. This is very well articulated in this column by Charles Blow in 2018. He is going to take these claims and use it as an opportunity to sort of ridicule the Black Lives Matter movement and young Black voters. A lot of the government claims about the Russian disinformation is that it targeted, young activist-minded Black people. So he's going to accuse Russia of a racialized crime and for sabotaging and demobilizing Black voters in 2016. So obviously, putting together a dissertation is quite difficult. Like I said, I was collecting all these articles and this media coverage, and I was thinking about maybe doing a case study, maybe around the theory of propaganda campaign. And my dissertation people were not impressed at all, and they really weren't trying to hear that approach. And so I kept coming back to this collection of Facebook ads, which Congress had released in 2018, had released to the public. And they're going to really become the data that I use to put together a sample for the study. And all of the disinformation claims, in terms of election interference, is a huge topic, right? There's lots of different tentacles or branches to the coverage. In terms of the disinformation, or I define disinformation as propaganda on social media, or foreign propaganda on social media, something like that. So all of these claims as it relates to 2016 are going to come out of the Internet Research Agency. So the theory that I'm going to come up with is well, let me back up. So I did some preliminary analysis. So there's about 3,300 PDFs that the government is going to release that look, something like what's here. And so I looked through all of them and looking for Black themed content. Again, this is a preliminary analysis, and for a few different reasons, I settle on audience commodity theory and critical political economy of media to really understand the ads. I did see a lot in the ads that would lead me to different textual interpretations, but I mean, I can talk about that more later. But what I really wanted to do is understand the IRA as an entity and look at it as as one would look at a typical media firm. I think most everyone, right, who comes into this topic comes into it with the assumption or the presumption that the IRA was exactly what the U.S. government said it was, which is a propaganda firm or disinformation firm. I wanted to just step back, knowing what I had known about some of the issues or the breakdown in media coverage from earlier eras, right? And I want to just look at it as one would do as one would look at a typical media firm and to try to understand its marketing practices, its business practices, and if I could come up with any other ideas about what the IRA might be doing in terms of its approach to Black audiences. So again, it's a content analysis, taking these PDFs that the government has released. So the content analysis, obviously good. It's a bedrock approach in communications. One of the main issues that I saw was a lot of cherry picking of different ads or content in the whole Russia Gate saga, right? And so, to be a scientist, obviously, or approaching in a scientific way, I needed to look to use the content analysis to get beyond that cherry picking. And as a critical scholar, and I would say is pretty much a materialist type a person or scholar philosophically, and also adding in there the critical political economy piece. The main uh, the main unit of analysis that I use here is ad spending, right? So all of these these PDFs are coming with lots of metadata, and one of the key pieces of information in this metadata is the actual spending. So the spending in rubles is in each one of these ads has its spending in rubles and also other data like likes and shares, etc. So for the sample, I restricted the sample to the ads from October and November 2016, pretty much what I had time for. In terms of the dissertation, also, my preliminary analysis didn't really show any spikes of, different types of content between the 2015 and 2016 period that these ads were from. Also, just using conventional political advertising research, we talk about something called effects decay, which essentially says that people are not going to be affected by ads, or they're not going to be influenced or heavily influenced or influenced at all by ads unless they're in a really kind of tight window of time, political ads. And that's about a week or so after they see that, if at all. Like, so a lot of the research, or a strong contention of the research on political ads and media effects, is that political ads have no effect at all. So here are some of the research questions. I wanted to know if the paid, I'm going to call it also paid content or advertising, demonstrated a bias in favor of one candidate over the others. So that would be Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and Jill Stein. I wanted to try to say something about the likely impact of the content, and to again use critical economy to discern anything else about IRA motivations and intentions as it related to Black content. So the content analysis involved, thematic categorization. So I've essentially put them into two buckets. There was election-related themes and non-election-related categories. Again, this comes out of the preliminary analysis of the ads, and also the research literature, right? So here's a quick highlight of some of the results. So in US dollars, the spending on Black themed content in the last 2 months of the campaign was about $3,800, which is not much at all. Very small spend. So explicit election-related ads, this would be things that are directly tied to the election with candidates, etc. That was even smaller. So we're talking about $239 essentially, and the sample had about 348 items in it. And this sample essentially consisted of all of the ads on IRA administered Black themed pages, which I was able to identify. So again, more categorization. What I found is that the ads focused on negative messaging about Donald Trump rather than Hillary Clinton. So this goes against the major storyline of the overall Russiagate claims. A lot of the negative Trump ads were linked to IRA side venture to sell Trump apparel, right? And I found essentially one ad for Jill Stein. And again, one of the major storylines of the scandal is the IRA support of third-party candidates, especially in the context of the Black voter, or the Black themed content. So here's a look at some of the specific ads. I usually prefer the term of paid post. And I can talk about that later, but that's just a little nomenclature thing for me. So it's easy to see how some of these ads were cherry picked, I would say. So this is one of the pages, was this guy Williams and Calvin, out of the content. And I think more, we'll wait. More will be revealed. A lot of my conclusions are tentative here. We'll need more historical information, but so yeah, so there was some very negative. There were a couple very negative. What I categorize as Hillary attack ads, but the one that was probably most extreme in the overall, in the whole sample, my sample, the IRA spent no money on it, and it had about 6 shares, right? Again, a lot of what predominated was what I call anti-Trump commercial content, where the IRA spent bigger bucks, though not, we're still talking about, the kind of money that most people have in their pockets during the day, right? So here's I think a typical example of what I call an anti-Trump commercial ad in the sample. So again, so what I saw throughout the analysis was a lot of sort of low-level commercial activity. Another category was anti-establishment political ads. So here's one. Again, I mean, from a content perspective, it might um, be something that appears dangerous, but the IRA spent about $1 on this ad. And then here's the one third-party promotion ad involving Jill Stein. So this will be focused on a lot in different media, but the IRA spent about like $7.45, right? And obviously what we know about campaign spending, etc. The 2016 campaign was a $6.5 billion campaign from a presidential and congressional election standpoint. This money was really not going to make much of an impact at all. So uh, that helped me answer one of the central questions about the content. So the theory was really cool because it opened up sort of new vistas for me, audience commodity theory. I started to see the rampant commodification of Black Lives Matter, and I started to sort of like tentatively find, I guess, or see the IRA as what I call a run-of-the-mill clickbait agency, or a sort of a garden variety clickbait agency that happened to be based in Russia, so it lended itself to be part of this overall political narrative. Um, Here is so this guy, Ian Mackey, he's a union worker in Australia. He had the largest Black Lives Matter page on Facebook at one time before it was brought down. And no political motivations whatsoever. But I conclude or surmise or whatever that the IRA was essentially doing what he was doing. And so in my dissertation, the critical political economy really allowed me to get into this whole other aspect of the case, I guess the case against the IRA, which is understanding the clickbait media industry, understanding digital advertising, understanding the uh, the technicalities, I guess, or how companies or clickbait companies look to attract audiences or attract. So what they're trying to do for the most part is fool larger automated programmatic advertising platforms. So they need a veneer of audience appeal, I guess, to cover that up. Um, some of the other, again, so what I talked about in some of my work is the rampant corporate commodification of Black Lives Matter. This is the NBA Black Lives Matter game floor. So corporations were very heavily in on the commodification action here. So in some ways, you can see you can think about the IRA as an early sort of innovator in this whole effort. Here is high school graduate Deviante Joseph. Um, so he was snapped during Black Lives Matter summer 2020. So this photo goes viral on social media. You can see in the background the gray smoke from the fires and law enforcement, etc., and the debris on the ground. And so this picture became a powerful symbol of hope in the future and hope for the future during Black Lives Matter. But even here, we see the rampant commodification of this movement. So this is his GoFundMe campaign. So there's other parts to this too as well. Part of it was I call it there's a cultural and historical analysis that I look at here. And I think there's a lot of scientific racism in the literature, in academic literature on this, on Russiagate and Black America. Almost no Black political science research is ever cited when talking about these issues, or no Black scholarship at all ever. I see in 99 to 100% of these studies. And Black political science is a very well-developed academic field. There's also a lack of sourcing on things like Black activism, Black digital activism, or audience social media practices. Also, there's no research out there at all that shows that that the exposure from these ads was well, there's no documented exposure. There's no documented exposure, and then there's no mechanism that anyone could point to show how Black people were actually affected by these ads, right? And that's always important to communication scholars, right? So we want to dispel some of the simplistic notions about media effects. I came up with a couple of points in terms of cultural analysis when you look at these issues historically. So, we know that it was claimed that MLK and different figures of the Black Power movement were essentially targets of disinformation back in the day, right? So there's some common themes that come up historically. And so the term that I made up was the inadequate citizens, right? So the idea that Black communities are overly susceptible or vulnerable, or not up to their democratic responsibilities in some way. And this kind of imagery has been used to erode Black people's voting rights. There's also the Black subversive stereotype, which has not been, in my mind, sufficiently explored in terms of media coverage, right? And so most of this is going to come out of media coverage. I mean, the things about Martin Luther King, we said about Martin Luther King, that all of that stuff was leaked to the Associated Press and the New York Times from the FBI, from J. Edgar Hoover, essentially. There's definitely current implications. The FBI in 2017 started going after Black identity extremists. So these are essentially radical Black protesters who are coming under attack, and that you can chart a line all the way back to Russiagate for that. This case is still ongoing. So Florida federal trial, they call it the Uhuru 3. So this group was alleged to have to been in cahoots, I guess, with Russia. And they were actually convicted of conspiring to act as unregistered foreign agents. But they were acquitted of a more serious charge of acting as agents of a foreign government. So very intense implications here. There's implications for Black social movements overall. It's important to remember, so this is Black scholarship, right? So it's important to remember that throughout history, minority protests have triggered significant government action across the board, both from the executive level, the legislative level, and in the courts, right? And we know that Black Lives Matter, though it's easily forgotten today, has been correlated to reduce police killings, and this is not just Black people. So we all benefit when people go out into to the streets and demand change. So yeah, so it's always going to be very important from a critical perspective. Vague claims of foreign interference degrade the legacy of Black consciousness, and I'm going to say that such claims require vigorous scientific skepticism, right, on their face. So I'm gonna move through some other ancillaries type slides, and then we can open it up. But so this kind of research is very difficult because or time consuming, I would say, because you have to know a little bit about, or you have to know enough about a lot of different literatures. Obviously, disinformation is gonna sort of spring up in 2016. You need to know a little bit about public diplomacy, debates over polarization, partisan polarization, social polarization. There's literatures for all these things. There's literature about national intelligence and security, which at the time when I was doing this research, it was the number one issue in this whole field was intelligence failures, right? But none of that literature ever makes it into any of these studies of these Russia claims. Obviously, political economy, you have to understand the political economy of the clickbait media industry. And there is some really good work that advertising scholars have done, studies with insiders, interviews with insiders of this whole industry, really explaining how it works. So that was very helpful. Digital advertising, the gross amount of fraud that's always been part of this aspect of advertising. You have to understand, conventional research about political advertising, political communications. USA, Russia relations is very important. So a lot of these, the research touches on a lot of these areas. So what I think is that there should be a new field called critical disinformation, right? And so the critical disinformation field would integrate some of these critical cultural ideas, some of which I talked about. I think ethnocentrism is a very important idea out of political science. Russophobia, which is not something that it's almost an invisible phenomenon in terms of academic research. Black political science, as I talked about, anti-Black stereotyping is very important. There's some discourse ideas that I think that were very important and helpful to me on elite racism, symbolic elites. We talked about social movements. This research also led me to understand ethnocentrism, which includes obviously Russophobia, is one thing that I'm more curious about all the time. And the popular imagery we have of Russia and Putin, I think, is very important. Islamophobia is still a really big issue, though. There's lots of literature about Islamophobia. This is the list of terrorist themed films in Hollywood. So it's just on and on and on and on. And then I think xenophobia is very important today too. So one of the ideas that came, as I tried to understand ethnocentrism and incorporate that in my work. So all of these uh, campaigns that will take Americans into war and make the poorest Americans, right? The poorest Americans out there on the front lines, which I saw with my own eyes, will be sacrificed, right? In these conflicts, right? And so I think that as scholars, some of us, or the few of us who are interested, should should scrutinize the claims of the government or the political elites, or however you want to talk about them. We should scrutinize them heavily, right? And with that, I think that's what I will really talk about. Um, well, let me just back up a little bit. So future research directions, looking for government documents to shed more light on IRA activity. I talked about disinformation studies, and I'll end on Al Sharpton, right? So in 2020, there's a primary with Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, and the Biden campaign is really using what we might call, I guess, a red smear against Bernie Sanders. And Al Sharpton came out in Bernie Sanders' defense, right? He said the civil rights movement always was targeted by those that would use the Red Scare. They accused Dr. King of being a communist. We've been down that road before, and this is the money quote right here. We are not that stupid to allow you to tell us who is what, right? And that's what key thing, key idea from the Black research tradition. So with that, we can take questions.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so feel free to put a question in the Q&A box, and we can monitor that. And yeah, we have a great resource here who has done some great research. So feel free to ask anything that you think is relevant. I have a question for you. So with regards to commodification of Black Lives Matter, I guess where's the balance between, I'm thinking from a more of a public relations standpoint of, getting the word out there and having that support, but then also, this idea of the commodification of it.
Yeah, well, I think that, like I said, that was a finding that came out of nowhere for me. Obviously people can look at it and say, well, obviously that movement is being commodified, but I think it has something to do with the prevalence of the pervasiveness, I guess, of Black culture. Is really kind of kickstarted the commodification there, and that's certainly one aspect of it. I think most social movements are going to be, now I haven't done this research, but this is just my sort of expert understanding, I guess, would be that most of the movements, obviously we see all of the movements from the 60s are like heavily commodified to this day, women's empowerment or radical 60s. It's almost like cliche at this point. So the movements are gonna have a kind of a cycle where they are radical at some point, and then they become more commodified as time goes by. But that's just what I can gather from my observation of it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I would agree the same. I mean, even just with most recent change in our government and just the commodification of Elon Musk and all of the things that we're seeing now, even with, the White House social media account, putting a crown on Trump's head.
Okay, wow.
Let's see. Dr. Freeman, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that the IRA ads did not target a specific candidate. Do you think the main goal was to dissuade Black voters to take part in the election?
Yeah, so my conclusion is that I think the IRA was not a propaganda organ. And so that is a very, very I would call it almost illicit opinion, right? Because almost all of the government government reports or government rhetoric has said that they are. All right, so I'm going to start, which I've read all of them, and I'm not saying that I think that there's a definitive answer just yet, but I just don't, when I look at it, I just don't see the evidence. I don't see the evidence. I see the statements from high-level agencies, intelligence agencies, and politicians, et cetera, but I don't see the evidence. As a scientist, I need to see the evidence. So if I could just step back, I mean, I know that's hard. I mean, that's a very, very minority opinion. But I don't think that they have. So what I found what I think the motivation of the IRA was to commodify the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think they were very early to this movement. And they I don't know if I can get my slides back up, but there's been a lot of research about the IRA and their lack of covertness, right? Or yeah, so all of the obviously I counted their money in rubles. So number one, they're paying in rubles. So if you're a covert agency looking to sway a particular population, you probably wouldn't do it in rubles. I mean, there's been linguistic analysis that shows that they didn't really try to use English speakers to write their ads. There's other analysis about how the ads were targeted. So there's nothing in the geographical targeting where they maybe try to uh, target certain important states, um, or so the list goes on and on. I mean, they did all of their work seemed to map squarely on Moscow Standard Time or whatever that is. So there was really no effort at all. And so most of the scientists will say it was a crude effort at disinformation. I look at it in my interpretation as well. Maybe somebody should put out there that maybe there might be a conclusion that it wasn't disinformation. So a lot of critical journalists are on this point. So I don't think and they really weren't, the way I understand it too is they really were not interested in reaching a actual users per se. What they were interested in doing is creating like a patina of activity around the topics, and that sort of their sort of crude clickbait type advertising would then draw in the advertising bots and give them money. And so I mean, this is a by understanding of the industry, so that this is how the clickbait advertising industry works. So I don't think that they were really interested at all in any political activity per se. What they were really interested in, and some of the other data or some of the other findings I have, is this sort of crude commercial activity around Black Lives Matter. So I see a question from Diego Melendez. It says,
Uh-huh.
everything was well explained. How do you see this playing out over the next few years? I'm curious how these movements will evolve with the years and the different ideas they face throughout. Well, I don't know that. So Black Lives Matters, I think, is pretty much uh, come to its conclusion per se. Obviously, there's a lot of discourse about it. Historians will write about it. Political scientists will try to understand it. But um, excuse me. So the movements have and again, I'm not a movement scholar, but the movements have their periods and they have their cycles of growth and decline. And so I'm not sure how that plays out. In terms of the Russiagate discourse, I think it's going to be very interesting. I think a lot of, obviously the Trump administration, this was a huge thorn in the side of Trump, and there's going to probably be a lot information that will be presented or exposed to give us answers one way or the other. Like I could be completely wrong, I could be completely wrong, and show like a detailed connection between the Russian government. You know, in order to have disinformation, you have to have a government actor, right? And so far, I've not seen any publicly available evidence that really establishes those connections. So I think this is a discourse that will go on for a while. I think in terms of journalism, if the journalism proves to be as poor quality as I think that it was, then there's going to be hell to pay because, well, it's already been hell to pay. I mean, journalistic credibility is already sort of through the floor already, and people are gonna, you know, resist what the mainstream media says even more. Is gonna give political fodder to all sorts of people some of them who want to do good, and some of them who may not want to do good in the political arena. So this is the discourse about this Russian if for Russian disinformation or Russian election interference. It is certainly not over. So we're in like a new chapter, I think, with the new Trump administration. Um, and I'll go to some of the other questions. There's a couple more.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Dominic Martella, it's a great presentation and a really interesting interpretation. So is it correct to say that the IRA had little interest in changing voter behavior, but rather to generate income from that? So that is let me finish reading it. So is it correct to say that the IRA had little interest in changing voter behavior, but rather to generate income from that digital advertising? I think so. I think so that's my tentative conclusion. I mean, but there's no smoking gun. I will say there's like no sort of smoking gun out there that would reveal this. I do think there's a lot of questions in terms of how this focus on the IRA originated and where it originated from. Obviously, there's evidence on the other side. There's lots of government statements, but so far really not any evidence where I can look at it. So one of the things that I focus on is the discourse about national intelligence and the journalism around national intelligence and how reports are written. Like most people don't really know these things, but people have done, obviously, it's a research topic. Uh, uh, um, so it can be known there. There is sufficient information. Like I wouldn't have known these things as a reporter, but known to look for certain things or clues as a reporter. But you can certainly, by reading the national intelligence literature, you can look at these things and say, well, maybe some of the conclusions that are being made in terms of that are the foundation of disinformation are more tentative, right? Are more tentative than what the media claims or what politicians claim sometimes. So it is my interpretation. I would say that is correct. It's my interpretation that um, by and large, the IRA was just like this guy out in Australia, right? So just a very low level commercial activity, clickbait activity. But because his firm happened to be, in Saint Petersburg instead of Australia, it sort of lended itself to this other narrative. And again, I would just say this is a very, very uh uh, sort of isolated interpretation of what's going on. I mean, almost everyone believes something other than what my interpretation is at this point. But I will say I've done what we do in research. I've looked at the anyone can look at this data too. I mean, it's publicly available data. I've looked at the data, right? I've looked at the data. I've added it up, and even while I don't think it was the IRA's motivation, but even if it was the IRA's motivation, the media should not, and historians and other people should not be repeating the idea that this type of activity had an impact on Black voters. There's just really no evidence of that whatsoever. So I hope that answers. So Sean has a question. He says, I wonder your thoughts of how the growth of AI will continue to challenge movements affecting messaging and how grassroots movements will counter those with resources to use AI against said movements. Well, I think tools are tools, right? And they'll be used on they'll be used for and against movements of humans, and humans are very creative. They're very creative with their tools, right? What I was thinking is it would be helpful to have maybe a AI bot that is a critical bot, like a critical media bot or something like that, or critical chat box or whatever, where instead of, pro-government or pro-official line biases, you get different types of biases because that's all it seems to, um, some information seems to be weighted over other information. And, um, let multiple tools sort of emerge. And because we should be very hesitant about allowing there to be an official line one way or the other, especially with things that are contentious as this, especially with Black people. People say all kinds of stuff about Black people and their political behavior or their culture behavior or whatever. And a lot of it is never, and this is what we learned at Howard, a lot of it is never tied to any facts. It's just people, scientists sometimes, or analysts, even Black analysts, they have a particular picture in their head about what's really going on. But there's almost always a literature, and I hope that the students really understand that there's almost always a literature. There's a literature about for my purposes, there's a literature about Black political activity in 2016, which you can look at as literatures about, like I said, there's advertising literature, digital advertising literature, clickbait media literature. There's all these different literatures, and you don't have to be a 90%, 100% expert to talk about these things in an intelligent way, but you do need to get the basics of, what's being said in those given literatures, right? A lot of times science is very narrow looking, so it's very difficult to have a project where you look sort of like over the horizon, but somebody has to do it, right? Somebody has to look more broadly, and I would just always press students to look a little more broadly, get up in the air more, I guess, in terms of the problems that they face. Now, you might not, it might not be lucrative, or it might not be the kind of science that most people are going to want to appreciate as science per se, because of what kind of science is rewarded. But but it's this was a problem. I don't want there to be what happened. What the real problem became. The problem started for me when I was trying to understand what was happening in this case, but I couldn't find any literature, any historical literature from Black people about earlier social movements, or you might call them Red Scares or whatever, that really documented connections over time, or patterns over time. And there's maybe a little piece here that a sociologist did, or historian did there, but it's really important to kind of bring it together, and to get communication scholars right in the middle of it. So let me go through. I think there's one other question, and then that might be it. Did you find fact-checking or appropriate successful counterforce to the disinformation campaign? Was there any resilient strategy noticing how people responded to messaging? Well, again, I mean, fact-checking is always going to inherently have some sort of biases, right? So I see, as a former reporter, I can see the biases straight away. So if an official line or an official narrative gets sort of set in stone, then the fact checking is always going to sort of lean in that direction. But those might not be facts, right? So the facts are always in science. The facts are contested, right? And until we get mountains and mountains and mountains of evidence one way or the other. But it might be okay for for general public consumption, though I'm not a big fan of fact checking. But in terms of scientific work, we should always be very skeptical about anything that people are going to establish for us as facts. In terms of the resilience strategy notes and how people respond to messaging, so the last thing I'll talk about is the science that we do have about Black digital activism online. So part of the audience commodity theory is digital labor, right? And so one of the contexts I looked at is so Black Lives Matter movement is actually going to start on Facebook, and it's going to start with young Black women and queer people putting this movement together through social media platforms, including Facebook, and a lot like the Me Too movement, and there's a lot of different movements that Black women particularly have been pretty strong in establishing on the line, like a lot of hashtag movements. And so what didn't really square with reality for me is if we think about the heavy Black presence on different social media platforms. I mean, there's a Hyundai commercial with this father with his daughters, and they're doing all this sort of they're doing all this Black social media slang and everything. So there are Black scholars who suggest that the grammar of the social media is Black American grammar for the most part. It just doesn't make it put that together with the prolific nature of Black political activism and agency online, with this other characterization that Black people are vulnerable and susceptible to misinformation and are, like I say, inadequate citizens when it comes to political information online. There's too much of a contradiction there, and that's one of the things that I point out in my work as well. And that might be the last question.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you so much for all of your questions and for all of you attending. And thank you, Dr. Freeman, for your time and sharing your experience and expertise with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks for all the excellent questions.
All right, everyone, take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.